At 68, Steve Harvey stands as one of the most successful entertainers of his generation, a man who climbed from absolute rock bottom to become a global icon. His quick wit, signature mustache, motivational speeches, and unforgettable hosting moments have made him a beloved figure around the world. From Family Feud to sold-out stand-up tours, from best-selling books to talk shows syndicated globally, Steve seemed unstoppable. But behind the applause, the bright suits, and the confident smile lies a heartbreakingly different reality. Few people truly understand the unimaginable pressure, the betrayals, the financial chaos, and the emotional wounds he has carried for decades. Even fewer know how close he came to losing everything, not once, but several times. And now, at 68, the weight of his past has returned stronger than ever. Rumors, family complications, career fatigue, and the emotional toll of a lifetime of sacrifices have created a storm around him, one that fans fear may be the hardest he has ever had to face. This is not the story of a celebrity downfall. This is the story of a man who rose from nothing, fought the world, and paid a devastating price for his success. This is the tragedy of Steve Harvey. Long before the fame, before the stages, before the cameras, there was simply Broderick Stephen Harvey, a young man filled with dreams but surrounded by hardship. Growing up in a working-class family in West Virginia, Steve was taught early that nothing in life came easy. His father, a coal miner, worked long, exhausting hours, and Steve learned grit from watching him come home covered in dust but refusing to complain. Even as a child, Steve struggled with a severe stutter that made communication painful. Kids laughed at him, teachers doubted him, and opportunities slipped away because he couldn't speak without tripping over his words. Few knew the emotional scars this left behind, scars that, even decades later, he admits still affect him. As an adult, Steve bounced between low-paying jobs, carpet cleaner, box factory worker, mailman, even auto plant worker. But nothing fit. Nothing felt like his purpose. When he finally tried stand-up comedy, everything changed, but not in the way people imagine. The early years weren't glamorous, they were brutal. He traveled city to city, often performing for crowds who didn't laugh, didn't care, or didn't show up at all. Then came the lowest point, homelessness. Steve spent 3 long years living in his car, washing in gas station bathrooms, eating what he could afford, and performing in cheap clubs just to survive. He hid this from his children because he was ashamed. The pain of that separation, of missing birthdays, milestones, and moments he could never get back, haunted him for decades. Those years shaped him, but they also broke him in ways the world never saw. When Steve Harvey finally broke through in the early 1990s, it wasn't an overnight miracle, it was the result of years of pain, sacrifice, and relentless work. His appearances on Showtime at the Apollo and success on the comedy circuit catapulted him into the national spotlight. By the time the Steve Harvey Show premiered, he had become one of the most successful comedians in America. But as Steve's star rose higher, so did the pressure, and new problems followed him every step of the way. Fame looked glamorous from the outside, fans cheered, networks called, and opportunities multiplied, but behind the scenes, Steve was drowning in responsibility. Being a leading man on television while still performing stand-up, touring constantly, and appearing on radio burned him out faster than he could recover. He worked brutal hours, slept little, and carried the heavy weight of knowing that failure was not an option. After years of homelessness, he feared losing everything again. That fear pushed him, but it also tormented him. His personal life suffered the most. His early marriages crumbled under the pressure of his unpredictable schedule and the emotional distance that fame created. His children, whom he loved deeply, often felt the consequences. Steve has openly admitted that he missed countless birthdays, school events, and ordinary moments that he could never reclaim. The guilt stayed with him even as he built his empire. Then came the era of the kings of comedy. While the tour was wildly successful, it took a physical and emotional toll. The competition, the expectations, the massive audiences, all of it was overwhelming. Steve felt he had to prove himself constantly, even to people who already admired him. Behind every sold-out show was a man terrified of slipping back into the life he once escaped. As he entered the 2000s, Steve's workload only intensified. Television shows, radio hosting, book deals, endorsements, he became a one-man media machine. But that kind of success demands a price. The endless travel strained his relationships. The public scrutiny amplified every mistake. And the stress of balancing fame with family left him emotionally exhausted. People saw the jokes, the smiles, the perfectly tailored suits. They didn't see the nights he spent alone in hotel rooms, questioning whether he had traded too much of his life away. They didn't see the battles behind the scenes, the legal disputes, the staff turnover, the frustration of being pulled in a dozen directions at once. By the time Steve reached a level of fame most performers could only dream of, he was already running on empty. And the worst part was that he didn't even know the darkest chapter of his life was still ahead of him, the betrayal that would nearly destroy everything he had worked for. Just when Steve Harvey believed he had finally secured stability, strong ratings, steady income, and a public image built on resilience, his life was blindsided by a betrayal so severe it nearly destroyed him. It wasn't an enemy, a rival, or a stranger. It was someone he trusted with everything, his personal accountant. For years, Steve assumed his taxes, finances, and earnings were being handled professionally. After all, he was juggling radio, television, comedy tours, and endorsements. He had no time to comb through every detail. But one day, after his accountant suddenly passed away, Steve discovered a horrifying truth. His taxes, stretching back several years, had never been paid. Letters from the IRS had been hidden from him. Signatures had been forged. And millions of dollars that were meant to cover those taxes had simply vanished. The shock was overwhelming. The betrayal cut deeper than any failure, any hardship, any public embarrassment he had ever faced. He had worked tirelessly to rebuild his life, only to be dragged back to the edge of ruin by someone he trusted completely. Overnight, Steve found himself owing more money than most people see in a lifetime. Penalties, interest, back taxes, the mountain was suffocating. He later revealed that he had to pay the IRS every single check he earned for years, just to dig his way out of the hole. Imagine appearing on television every day, smiling, entertaining the world, while knowing that every dollar you made wasn't yours. Imagine working multiple jobs not out of ambition, but out of desperation. Those closest to him said they had never seen Steve so broken. He was angry, humiliated, and deeply depressed. He questioned his judgment, his career, even his faith. He felt stupid for trusting someone so blindly. And the fear that had lived inside him since his days of homelessness returned stronger than ever, the fear of losing everything again. Steve admitted that during those dark years, he contemplated walking away from the industry entirely. The pressure was unbearable. His marriage, his career, and his mental health all suffered under the weight of financial chaos. Traveling non-stop, jumping from studios to sets to radio booths, he had little time to process the emotional devastation. But in silence and exhaustion, he kept going. Every show he hosted, every joke he delivered, every motivational speech he gave came from a man who was fighting for his survival behind the scenes. And though he eventually paid everything back, millions upon millions, something inside him never fully healed. The betrayal taught him a lesson he would never forget. Sometimes the people closest to you can cause the deepest wounds. But he had no idea that the most emotionally painful chapter of his life was still yet to come. At 68, Steve Harvey stands at the peak of a career that spans decades, yet he faces a level of emotional and public pressure unlike anything he has endured before. The world sees a man who hosts hit shows, inspires millions, and remains a powerful force in entertainment. But behind the cameras, Steve is grappling with a heartbreaking reality that fame can't protect him from: the toll of aging, the weight of constant scrutiny, and the wounds left by those closest to him. In recent years, Steve has found himself at the center of rumors, controversies, and relentless speculation about his personal life, particularly his marriage, his family dynamics, and his relationships with his children. Social media amplified the noise, sometimes twisting stories into narratives that painted him as the villain or as someone losing control of his own life. For a man who built his entire legacy on strength and perseverance, seeing his family life dissected publicly was a pain he never expected. Still, what hurts him the most is not the criticism, it's the fear of time slipping away. At 68, Steve has openly admitted that he thinks often about legacy, regrets, and the moments he sacrificed for work. He worries about the birthdays he missed, the relationships strained by fame, and the emotional distance that success inevitably created within his own household. He has acknowledged that despite all the accomplishments, there are parts of his life he wishes he could rewrite. Physically, hosting multiple shows and maintaining a demanding travel schedule has taken a noticeable toll. The early mornings, late nights, and constant pressure to perform leave him exhausted in ways he didn't feel 20 years ago. Friends say Steve pushes himself harder than he should, driven by a lingering fear that everything he's built could vanish if he slows down. Emotionally, the weight is even heavier. Behind closed doors, Steve struggles with the loneliness that often accompanies fame. He has spoken about feeling isolated at times, misunderstood, and burdened by being the person everyone turns to for strength. The world sees him as the mentor, the motivator, the man with all the answers. But when he is alone, the pain from decades of sacrifice catches up to him. And yet, perhaps the most heartbreaking part of Steve Harvey's story is that despite everything he has survived, homelessness, failed marriages, financial betrayal, public scrutiny, he still fears that people only love him for what he provides, not for who he is. That fear haunts him more today than ever before. At 68, Steve Harvey is not broken, but he is deeply bruised. He continues to smile, to uplift others, to entertain millions, even as he privately battles pressure, fatigue, and the emotional scars left by a lifetime of pushing forward. His tragedy is not defined by failure, it is defined by how much he has endured to remain standing. And through every heartbreak, Steve Harvey is still fighting.